Hi, everyone. So, Bryce had finally apologized to Julie, and he was feeling pretty good about that. Let's see. And he went to dinner feeling pretty good about things. And he says, it only took me a few minutes at the dinner table to realize that I was the only one who was. Lynetta had on her usual pout, so that wasn't it. But my father's idea of saying hello was to lay into me about the lawn. No sweat, I told him. I'll do it tomorrow. All that got me was a scowl. Then Mom says to my granddad, You tired tonight, Dad? I hadn't even noticed him sitting there like a stone. Yeah, my father tosses down the table at him. That girl working you too hard? My grandfather straightens his fork on his napkin and says, That girl is named Julie. And no, she isn't working me too hard, as you so callously put it. Callous? Me? My dad laughs and says, Developed quite a soft spot for that girl, haven't you? Even Lynetta let her pout go for a minute. These were fighting words, and everyone knew it. Mom nudged Dad with her foot, but that only made things worse. No, Patsy, I want to know why your father has the energy and inclination to befriend a complete stranger when he's never done so much as toss a baseball around with his own grandson. Well, yeah, I thought, but then I remembered. I owed my grandfather, owed him big time. Without thinking, I said, Take it easy, Dad. Julie just reminds him of Grandma. Everyone clammed up and stared at me. So I looked at my grandfather and said, Uh, isn't that right, Granddad? He nodded and rearranged his fork some more. Of Renee? My father looked at my mother, then at Granddad. She can't possibly. My granddad closed his eyes and said, It's her spirit that reminds me of Renee. Her spirit, my dad says, like he's talking to a lying kindergartner. Yes, her spirit. My grandfather's quiet for a minute, then he asks, Do you know why the Bakers haven't fixed up the yard until now? Why? Sure. They're trash, that's why. They've got a beat up house, two beat up cars, and a beat up yard. They're not trash, Rick. They're good, honest, hardworking people who obviously have no pride in how they present themselves to the rest of the world. We have lived across the street from those people for over 6 years, and there is no excuse for the state they're in. No. My grandfather takes a deep breath and seems to weigh things in his mind for a few seconds. Then he says, Tell me this, Rick. If you had a brother or sister or child who had a severe mental or physical handicap, what would you do? It was like my grandfather had passed gas in church. My father's face pinched and he shook his head. And finally he said, What does that have to do with anything? My grandfather looks at him for a minute, then quietly says, Julie's father has a retarded brother, and my father interrupts with a laugh. Well, that explains a lot, doesn't it? Explains a lot? My grandfather asks, quietly, calmly. Sure, it explains why those people are the way they are. He grins around the table at us. Must run in the family. Everyone looks at him. Lynetta's jaw drops, and for once she's speechless. My mother says, Rick! But all my father can do is laugh a nervous kind of laugh and say, It was a joke. I mean, obviously, there's something wrong with those people. Oh, excuse me, Chet. I forgot. The girl reminds you of Renee. Rick, my mother says again, only this time she's mad. Oh, Patsy, please. Your father is being overly dramatic, trying to make me feel bad for criticizing our neighbors because there's a retarded relative someplace. Other people have family troubles and still manage to mow their lawn. They should have a little pride and ownership, for crying out loud. My grandfather's cheeks are seriously flushed, but his voice is rock steady as he says, "They don't own that house, Rick. The landlord is supposed to maintain the premises, but he doesn't. And since Julie's father is responsible for his brother, all their reserves go to his care, and obviously it doesn't come cheap." Very quietly, my mom asks, "Don't they have government facilities for that kind of thing?" "I don't know the details, Patsy. Maybe there are no government facilities nearby. Maybe they thought a private facility was a better place for him to be." "Still," my dad says, "there are government facilities available, and if they don't want to go that route, that's their choice. It's not our fault their family had some sort of chromosomal abnormality, and I refuse to feel guilty for wanting." "It has nothing to do with chromosomes, Rick. It was caused by a lack of oxygen at birth." He brings his voice down, but it makes his words seem even more forceful. "Julie's uncle had the umbilical cord wrapped around his neck twice. One minute he was a perfect little baby, just like your son Bryce, and the next he was irreversibly damaged." My mother was suddenly hysterical. In seconds, she was bawling her eyes out, wailing, and my father was all over her, trying to calm her down. It was no use. She basically dissolved right there on the spot. Lynetta threw her napkin down and muttered, "This family is a joke," and took off. Then my mother bolted out of the room, sobbing into her hands, and my father raced after her, throwing my grandfather the wickedest look I had ever seen. That left Granddad and me and a table full of cold food. "Wow," I finally said. "I had no idea." "You still don't," he told me. "What do you mean?" He sat there like granite for a minute, then leaned across the table toward me and said, "Why do you suppose that upset your mother so much?" I, I, I don't know. Because she's female? He smiled, but just barely. "No, she's upset because she knows that she could very well be standing in Mr. Baker's shoes right now." I thought about it a minute and finally asked, "Did her brother have the cord wrapped around his neck when he was born?" He shook his head. "Well, then," he leaned forward even farther and whispered, "you did." That changes everything, doesn't it? We'll see how the family reacts to this news next time. See you guys.